going to give you a little video on how to prepare your quilt to be ready for binding. At this point, you have all 3 layers quilted together and you're ready to trim it so you can put the binding on. And when we trim it, what we're going to be doing is cutting off all this extra fabric and batting that we don't need. And what we want is a nice, clean, straight line with square corners. So when we go to put the binding on, our quilt will be square and it will lay nicely. So what you need to perform this task is your long straight ruler, a cutting mat, and if you have it, a great big square ruler. This is not necessary, but it's extremely handy because it gives you a great big square corner, which is perfect for making your corners of your quilt precise. So what we're gonna do, have your quilt laying on a flat surface. If you don't have a big hardwood floor area that you can lay your quilt down on, you can use a table. It doesn't have to all be fitting on the table. As long as you do a little bit at a time, it's perfectly fine. I am just lucky enough to have this big empty room with hardwood floors and a puppy who wants to help. Excuse me, Miss Izzy. So you're gonna take your cutting mat and put it underneath the quilt. And we're gonna start with a corner. So we're gonna put the cutting, the ruler in the corner. And our goal here is to square up the quilt, trim off the excess while not trimming off much of the quilt itself. Sometimes through the process of quilting, your quilt top gets a little wonky just from stretching and pulling and actual quilting. It's completely normal, so it is going to be normal if you have to trim off part of the quilt top. Not to worry, I try to just do, get as close to that edge as possible. Sometimes I even have a little bit of the batting that's showing, and all of that is just going to be enclosed in the binding, so you won't even see it, okay? So we're gonna put this in the corner and get as close as we can to the edge of the quilt without cutting too much of it off. If you can see here, I don't know how good he can zoom in, but there is gonna be some of this quilt that I trim off, and that's okay. And then I'm gonna take my long straight ruler and butt it up next to the big square one. And again, I'm just going to try to get as little of the quilt trimmed off as possible. And this one is actually pretty good. Sometimes what I'll do, if there's just like a little bit that's too far in, I'll pull the fabric. I mean, you don't want to move it around too much, but sometimes you have to fudge it a little bit. So after I get this exactly where I want it to be, and I'm ready to cut, get out my cutter. Make my cut here. And I'm going to cut both ways into this square. Make sure it's cut all the way. There. And then I'm going to move this over here. Move dog. And I don't have a whole lot of room with the mat here, so I'm just gonna cut a little bit. And that's a start. And then I just keep moving my cutting mat and the rulers all the way around the quilt until it's completely square.